Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Comics Rot Your Brain, the show where screenwriters talk about the comic books that we love, mostly from the 1980s. I'm one of your hosts, Steven Bagatourian.
And I'm your other host, Chris Derrick.
And Chris, we are talking about a comic book today called Brought to Light by Alan Moore and Bill Sienkiewicz, published in 1989 by Eclipse Comics, and this might just be the most dangerous comic book ever published. And I know that's a bold statement, but you know what? Somebody prove me wrong.
Back it up. No, back it up is what we got to tell them about this book, because this book is on its own. It's on its own level. So let's just talk to them about the book real quick.
Yeah. This book is out there, man. This comic is it's a history of covert actions by the CIA worldwide. And let me just read you sort of the some of the text on this book. That describes it. The book, first of all, it came about because of a lawsuit launched against the CIA. And this is a very unique origin story for a fucking comic book. A nonprofit organization known as the Christic Institute. They were a public interest law firm founded by some lawyers and a Jesuit priest, and they had been involved in some major whistleblowing cases and legitimately done some great work. And they filed a lawsuit against the CIA, and as a way of publicizing that lawsuit, they decided to publish this comic book, and they brought it to Eclipse, and somehow Alan Moore and Bill Sienkiewicz got involved. And let me just read the text on the actual book itself that describes what it is. And just to emphasize, too, this book was published as a flip book with two different stories. On each side of the book, it's a different story. We're going to be covering the side that Sienkiewicz and Moore worked on, and that's what we're reading the description of here. Okay, so Iran-Contra did not begin with Oliver North, nor is the scandal just about Iran and Nicaragua. For 30 years, a secret team of U.S. military and CIA officials, acting both officially and on their own, have waged secret wars, toppling governments, trafficked in drugs, assassinated political enemies, stolen from the U.S. government, and subverted the will of the Constitution, the Congress, and the American people. That is a quote from the Christic Institute. All right, the text here goes on to say that this book, Brought to Light, contains two stories. You choose to start at either end. Within these covers, you'll discover two incredible investigations that met in the middle and joined forces. Okay, so the side we're covering today is called Shadow Play, The Secret Team. And it's a dark vision of the Christic Institute's investigation, tracing the major players in the Iran-Contra scandal back through covert actions in Iran, the 1960s secret war in Laos, and the Bay of Pigs fiasco. All right. And so that's what the comic is. What that doesn't tell you is that the story is being narrated by an anthropomorphic eagle, like an American eagle wearing a crazy checkered suit and smoking and chomping on cigars. And he's like the most unreliable narrator ever. And he's got an incredibly horrible, evil attitude toward life. And this eagle is telling us the story of the CIA's covert actions. And oh my goodness, is this a surreal, insane ride? It's barely a story, man. It's really just a litany of crimes perpetrated by the CIA worldwide, as outlined in this lawsuit, and now being regurgitated to all of us by the Eagle, who's actually mounting a spirited defense for all of these corrupt, horrific actions worldwide. And man, I gotta say, Chris, this is like nothing I've ever read in comic book form. And for a comic that was done by Bill Sienkiewicz and Alan Moore, two of the three biggest creators of the 1980s. These guys were beyond rock stars, some of the biggest creators ever in the history of comics. For them to use their creative capital at that moment to go and produce something this provocative and this antagonistic toward the U.S. government, I think is basically unprecedented. I don't think there's ever been something like this. This is crazy.
It's unprecedented, and guess what? Nobody would ever do that today. No one would do it in the last 20 years. In the last 30 years, nobody would do it.
I mean, these guys, I don't know how they had the gumption and the courage to do this, because, this is just, it's a wild decision. And the Christic Institute was a very respected group at the time. Here's a quote about them from the Reverend Jesse Jackson in that era. Said, "The Christic Institute has done this country a great service by investigating and exposing violations of law carried out by the Contra Network." And, George Bush was not a fan of the Christic Institute. He said, "If any of these little left-wing outfits like the Christic Institute have something on me, let's see what it is. Let the American people have it examined and have a fair resolution made." So these guys were players. They were players in the world of politics. And somehow it happened that they got this comic produced by Moore and Sienkiewicz at the height of their powers in the 80s. I mean, what a world, man. Like, what a world that this happened. And also, how crazy is it that this book is so forgotten? Like you and I were talking about, like, in what world can a comic made by Alan Moore and Bill Sienkiewicz be completely buried by history and utterly forgotten? Well, apparently in this world that we're living in right now, because no one knows this fucking comic exists. Like, this is crazy. It was published once amidst lawsuits and threats of lawsuits and all kinds of pushback from the government, and the original co-publisher Warner Books dropped out. But like, it's almost like this book never existed, Chris. Like, there's so little out there about this book.
Well, yeah, but the thing that I think that we talk about in the episode, and everyone, if you get a chance to try to read this online or get it on eBay, is that it's so inflammatory, particularly at the time, that you have to consider that nobody wanted this stuff out. It's pre-internet. And so there's no real way to debunk something, or people could put on like a YouTube video, that could be the counterfacts or anything like that, or talking heads or what have you. So it comes out and it's going to drop like a bomb for what it's supposed to do. But everyone is getting fucking, like, they're getting their arms twisted behind the scenes. And that's why I think it's only been published once. That's why I think that no one talks about it. That's why I don't even think that Sienkiewicz and Moore talk about it in subsequent, like, these interviews about their work, because it's such a gamble for them. But real quick, I just want to tell everyone what was going on, like, in the world at that time, so they get a kind of context of what's happening.
For sure.
So this book was timed to come out to undercut George Bush's election efforts against Michael Dukakis. This was the Iran-Contra hearings, like, were in full effect at this point. In the world of Hollywood, so Penny Marshall's Big came out, so did Die Hard and Who Framed Roger Rabbit. This is the first year that Sting did his first concert in the rainforest to protect the Amazon, to coordinate with that Nothing Like the Sun album. And it was and Iran and Iraq, they signed a ceasefire to end their 8-year war. And the movie E.T. first debuted on home video with 14 million pre-sold copies. So all that's kind of going on in the world, and that's when this book comes out, to be this atomic bomb, to expose what's going on. It's interesting, and we talk about it more in the episode, about this is the kind of stuff that movies got made of, like, in the next 15 to 20 years. It was all kind of explored in cinema, but at the time, no one had been doing it. And so that's... Yeah,
100%. And I just want to say, last couple things, just to piggyback on everything you just said. Yeah, no one was talking about this kind of thing at the time. It was unbelievably provocative material. This lawsuit that the Christic Institute had filed against the CIA and various members of the CIA, it was a legitimate thing. This was a real thing that was working its way through the court system. And just to give a little bit of background on some of that, it was ultimately thrown out. And we don't know why it was thrown out. We don't know the details or the specifics, if it was legitimately thrown out and considered, or if there was just a bunch of behind the scenes political maneuvering that caused a judge to throw this lawsuit out. But it's, here we have a little bit of research. We're looking at Warner Brothers decided to pull out after the lawsuit was thrown out. And it says here, Warner Books has terminated its agreement to co-publish the controversial brought to light with Eclipse Comics, citing fears of vulnerability to libel litigation. So Warner tendered Eclipse a cash settlement to remove itself from the project. According to Eclipse's co-publisher, Dean Mullaney, it was he and Kat Yronwode were behind the scenes here at Eclipse. This move pushed the publication of the Iran-Contra expose past the November election, unfortunately, so they were not able to get it published in time as they had hoped to, like you said, to affect the election. But it left Eclipse searching for a new distributor, and Alan Moore was asked about this, and here's what Alan Moore had to say regarding Warner Brothers pulling out and their libel objections about this work. Alan Moore said, "I don't know what your libel is really." I think he's speaking to American laws, but I've been given the facts and have tried to present them coherently with the work of this complexity and density. There were some areas I misunderstood, and we cleared those things up, and I revised the script. And of course, more information has come out, and I've changed the script appropriately. The script is based on material given to me by Eclipse and from the press and the Christic affidavit. Alan Moore said, "If those sources are true and accurate, then my script is true and accurate." So this is an insane publication history, CIA lawsuits, publishers pulling out, Eclipse, who finally published it, they never reprinted it, which is why this book is so hard to find and appears to have been buried and or forgotten. I want to just give a special shout out and a thank you to the Total Eclipse blog online. That's one of the places where we got the most research, kind of looking at the publication history of this. So check out totaleclipse.blog. It's a great site where somebody has reread every single comic ever published by Eclipse. So that would be of interest to anyone who's listening to this show. And I should also say that I want to thank everybody who's been voting in our new polls that we've posted on YouTube under our community tab. And by the way, we have heard your votes regarding the Bill Sienkiewicz book that you guys want us to cover next. We have seen the love being shown for New Mutants, and we will definitely be revisiting Bill Sienkiewicz's 80s work at some point soon. And New Mutants will be something we talk about at length. So yeah, you can look forward to that in the future. And speaking of that, also, everybody, please keep watching for future polls if you want to let us know other books you'd like us to cover. And as always, thank you for listening. And please remember to like and subscribe if you like what we're doing here at Comics Rot Your Brain. If you love 80s comics, especially some of the more obscure 80s comics off the beaten path and whatnot, and you want to keep listening to some discussions of these books, please like and subscribe. It means a whole lot. We appreciate it. And enjoy the show.
Well, Steve, before we get into anything, I just want to tell you, a couple of weeks ago when we did our Aztec Ace episode, I said that was probably going to be the most psychedelic book that we would ever read. I'm about to eat my words right now. About to eat my words because this is on par with that in terms of how insane it is. I don't know what Bill and Alan were thinking when they did this, or what they were on, or just what was going through their minds at that time in America. But this is a crazy book, which I say a lot. But I know that this is something that I don't think there's anyone who's seen anything quite like this. I think something interesting that to bring up is there was an interview that we both listened to about Bill Sienkiewicz when he was working on this. He was saying that, remember, he was saying that his studio was across the street from a Y, and he was living at a studio. And he would go to the gym and work out in the shower, come back. But he saw that a white van that was sitting across the street from his house was the studio for like time and time again. And he also got a few phone calls that that played back the last few minutes of previous phone calls that he had, or a few seconds of it. So it's like so. He was being recorded, and he was being spied on by FBI, CIA, whoever it was, because they obviously weren't happy with him. I think it's interesting that the subtitle of this is, how America was robbed, and I feel like, what do you think that they meant by that? By that America was robbed? Because like I feel it was like, oh, America got its innocence completely robbed. Like it's over. Like this and 9/11.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great point. You're right, because it does say that on the cover. It says 30 years of drug smuggling, arms deals, and covert operations that robbed America and betrayed the Constitution. Well, if Alan Moore was responsible for that subtitle, and perhaps he was, or even if it was Cat Yronwode, they're both incredibly savvy wordsmiths. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was multiple meanings intended there, because I think you're right. It is robbing America of its innocence or its ability to feel like it has awareness or knowledge of what's happening, or robbing America of its government obeying the principles of its constitutions. But I think it also could be taken quite literally as just robbing America of tax dollars and money that is then being funneled overseas for all these various foreign coups that the CIA operatives are supporting, and the incredible bloodbaths overseas with all these horrific campaigns of war and just the replacing of certain governments and just backing and funding of certain sides of the parties that are most advantageous to us in these other places. And so I don't know. I took it on multiple levels. I think they're pointing out a robbery that you could see applying across a spectrum of things.
Well, you made an interesting point about, I was talking about the tax dollars, because it's that great line at the end of the great line at the end of the book where the eagle who said, well, we'll get to the eagle as
we should explain who the eagle is too.
Yeah. So, but okay, just let me just say this little point, then we'll get to the eagle. So there's a point where the eagle is saying to the guy, "I got your tax dollars, so that's not what I'm asking you to pay me right now." So to set the context for this book, it's basically a guy who's in a bar telling a story to someone else coming to the bar. And that story and the person who's coming to the bar to hear the story is the reader. Now, the person you're talking to, he's not like a person. He's an eagle.
Yeah, he's like a big bald eagle in a checkered fuchsia 80s looking suit.
Yeah, like he's an anthropomorphic eagle, and he's drinking and smoking and doing coke and smoking cigars. It's a pretty crazy, but again, that goes back to the eagle is the symbol of America, and he's telling you that he's pussy whipped by his mistress, who is Congress. It's like it's such a crazy way to go into a book, and it's like this is again, like we said, we can't really do this episode like we would do like a typical episode, because we can't really explain to you like what's really happening, page by page, panel by panel, storyline, because all it is this eagle who's talking to you, the reader, and he's like trying to coerce you and convince you that the stuff they did, like, here's a point that I thought was interesting, is that they make a point that what is really the fear of America coming out of World War II is communism. And
yes,
it's, and there was some line in there where they said that, like, we would have helped the Nazis fight the Russians, like if they weren't winning the war that well. Like there's some line in there that makes you feel like the government was more okay with the Nazis than the communists.
Yeah, actually, you know what? I have the line right here. The eagle says, right here, in World War II, we was, and he's talking about the CIA here, I believe. In World War II, we was the Office Strategic Services, legitimate wartime enterprise, glory days, right? By 45, we had a perfect covert warfare operation. Seemed wasteful to shut it down just because we weren't at war anymore. Besides, maybe we'd fought the wrong guys. 1941, Harry Truman said, Harry Truman said we ought to help Hitler if Russia started winning, and that we, quote, kill as many as possible. See, business-wise, we recognized our real competitors, Reds, communists.
Yeah, see, so that's
the line.
Now, the thing that's interesting about this is this, right? I was reading a book a few months ago. It was a bit about the rise of the modern, Republican Party. And, during the Great Depression, there's a narrative that we've been taught that FDR saved America by doing all these, the WPA and they were spending money to get America out of the Depression. And then eventually, the war effort was really got us out of the Depression. But what they were saying was in the book is that Republicans hated all that public spending, and they were trying to sue the government to get them not to spend the money, the price controls, and all that stuff they had to do to stabilize what was going on. They hated it, and the people who ran against FDR, and although they lost in those elections, their platform was the government is getting too big, which makes sense because that's where the communism feels like it's coming from, right? Because if you remember in the 20s and 30s, there's all those people in Hollywood and New York and stuff like that, and other places in the country, people who worked for the unions and stuff like that. They were part of the American Communist Party. And it wasn't an outlawed thing. It wasn't considered this bad thing that you need to hide from until after the war,
Right. And then, of course, the blacklist era, where it got so super stigmatized, all came after that period you're talking about. But you're right. Yeah. It was a whole different thing. It's a whole different thing to be a communist in America pre-World War II.
Right. So it's just interesting that the story and the purpose of the OSS, which then becomes the CIA, is we have to stop the spread of the communist of red stuff throughout the globe. There's
right, and that's kind of the baseline for everything they do, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's why I thought the purpose of the title was who are they robbing? Because the reason why I don't think it's really about robbing money from us is they always talk about that every operation was funded by doing some drug shit or some military shit, mainly drug shit. They were set up heroin. They were saying that they used the Pepsi factories in Laos to funnel heroin around the world. I was that's kind of mind-blowing. Even now, when we know about all this crazy stuff, I'm still shocked about what is happening. I mean, they talk about the stuff in Iran with Mossadegh and why they did all that. And there's still a few little, details about this that even, 40 years on or whatever, 30 some years on, and we've heard a lot of this stuff, it's still a little shocking. The whole thing about the, what's he saying about the swimming pools? What is he saying about?
Well, I think one of the really interesting devices that Sienkiewicz and Moore use here is that they have the Eagle use swimming pools to measure the amount of blood that's being spilled in all these various foreign conflicts. And the first time they do it, they tell you, the Eagle tells you how much blood it takes to fill up an average large swimming pool. And so then from there on, that becomes our metric during all these conflicts is how many swimming pools of blood did we generate here? And, he says, for example, in South Korea, we backed Syngman Rhee, who executed without trial over 100,000 people as suspected communists. And you see a little graphic next to it, and it says 5 swimming pools. And you see the 5 bloody pools laid out like a little infographic. It's like an infographic from hell. And this is how we're we're charting like the death and the carnage everywhere.
Well, because he talks about how, like, well, what does he say? He says the average human body has like 1 gallon of blood in it, and then a swimming pool is 20,000 gallons. So every swimming pool that he's noticing is like 20,000 bodies getting killed. I think that's just like,
right.
I mean, it's pretty brutal, but pretty genius for how they want to like explain that in the book, because I think I think that you would get numb if he was showing us like slaughter after slaughter after slaughter in the pages,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I think that the presentation here with Moore and Sienkiewicz is very, very intentional. And, like you mentioned, we watched the brief interviews that you can find on YouTube right now with Alan Moore and Bill Sienkiewicz, where they talk a little bit about their process and their thoughts behind the book. And I think the very surrealistic presentation and like the noisy, shocking presentation of all of this is purposefully provocative, but also it's a way to kind of communicate this information that would otherwise be very dry, but it shouldn't be dry because it's detailing these incredibly horrific acts all over the world. But like I think Alan Moore said in one of the things we heard, that no person in their right mind is going to sit there and read through the 900-page document detailing all these crimes that the Christic Institute provided him with. And so he and Sienkiewicz were trying to figure out a way to break this all down into a palatable, and I put that word in quotes, a palatable 30 pages where you could compress all of this shocking information and use like the power of comic books to do it and to communicate this information, which really speaks to the other thing, Chris, that we were talking about just before we started recording, about how Alan Moore mentioned that the U.S. government itself had done some study, years ago, where they were trying to figure out the most effective way to basically communicate and give information or transmit information to large populations of people. And they tried doing it through pictures, they tried doing it through text, and then they tried doing it through comic books and sequential art. And that comics were by far the most effective way that the US government found to communicate their own propaganda to large groups of people. And so Alan said with, no small amount of irony, that he thought it was only fair play for comics to now be used to push back on the government propaganda of the US and to try to reveal the actual truths of these crimes in a way that people would actually pay attention to. And at least that was the hope. And, I feel like this book, I don't know that it made the impact that they had hoped it would make at the time. It sounds like, I don't think it was republished much. I think that there was some sort of injunction against Eclipse Comics, and I don't know if they published it again after the initial publication of it, which is part of why this book goes for quite a lot of money on eBay. I think you're looking at, a couple $100 for a decent copy of it. And I think there was a lot of legal wrangling, as you'd imagine, behind the scenes. So yeah, they got this information out there, and God bless them for doing it. But this just was an incredible thing to do for everyone involved. Really, really putting themselves on the line to try to communicate this info.
So the couple of things that you mentioned that sparked a mind to me. Like, first off, I'm going to talk about Sienkiewicz's art, right? Like,
yeah, we need to.
Like, this is the work that's coming up. This work feels like I think it's the immediate book after Electra Assassin, right? I'm not sure if it is, but it feels like it's all in that tone, right? Like that book is all about spies, super spies, and assassinations they're doing in Central America, and it's very much like it's a detail almost of like a Marvel character doing all the CIA work that is then talked about in this book, and it's like trying to assassinate the president. It's obviously, look, it's kind of cloaked with S.H.I.E.L.D. and everything like that, but there's his style. Like, the first page of this is the Statue of Liberty, and it's painted in a way where it's like at night, and it doesn't have a torch in its hand. it's got like a bomb. It's got like a time bomb with like with dynamite sticks in it, right? And it's like that so much. So if you can imagine that painted style he was doing, that was like the height of his that wacky psychedelic style he did that he created by doing like in New Mutants and then perfected in Electra Assassin. He's running on like the full burn like for this book, you know. And he also does the lettering, which is crazy because he kind of like jumps around from like different style. It's all hand letter too, like different. Some of it's cursive, some of it's like this weird explosive like block text. Some of it's just is regular comic type of lettering. It's all over the place to kind of fit with what the Eagle is saying, and that is pretty fascinating for his style. But I also feel like what you're saying, like why this book might not be so like it didn't do well. I think it didn't do well because it makes sense to me that when Warner Books drops out of this and pays them a sizable chunk of money, they know it's not enough money to cover like the legal fees. Because if there's any kind of injunction, it's anything on that level, which had to have happened. You know, I'm sure this is like a difficult book for them to publish, just in terms of like the internal strife that the company suffered. You know, like from doing this book. You know.
Oh yeah. I mean, it had to be. There's just no way you can publish something like this without getting some significant blowback. I mean, yeah, it's really insane, and I think that the art by Sienkiewicz is everything you said it is, Chris. It's psychedelic, it's surreal. I think for my money, it really is peak Sienkiewicz. I think this is some of his greatest work. It came out the same year that he did Stray Toasters, another book that I think is a visual peak for Sienkiewicz, which was a highly personal 4-issue miniseries he did that not enough people talk about, but that was written as well as drawn by Sienkiewicz. And I think he may have, I can't remember if he lettered Stray Toasters, but obviously, like you said, he definitely lettered Brought to Light. And this is some of the most original, like wild, just insane lettering you're ever going to see in a comic book. The lettering on Brought to Light is phenomenal, and it really adds so much personality to the character of the Eagle. And just seeing the way the Eagle is talking, the personality is massive in these letters, and it's a huge part of the book. And just in general, I think that this represents just some of the most bold and brash, just kind of like pedal to the metal Sienkiewicz that you will see out there. This is like Bill Sienkiewicz leaving it all on the floor, swinging for the fences, and doing everything he can to enliven this text, which is jaw-dropping, but it also gets a bit repetitive after a while in terms of just the USA involved in one horrific sort of action after another overseas, and deposing and killing foreign dictators and just lying to the people, et cetera, et cetera. But I think Sienkiewicz does so much to keep this thing moving and to keep it readable and lively, because you could imagine another artist drawing this and it would be a very, very tough read. But I think Sienkiewicz makes every page just an insane work of art, as hopefully people are going to appreciate when they see the video and are watching the images scrolling by as we're talking. This is just a signature Bill Sienkiewicz piece of art that this book looks like nothing else I've ever seen in comics. Every page is really magnificent. And this Eagle is such an amazingly designed character. And, you know, it's such a bold and awesome idea to make the main character this CIA agent representing all of this corruption, to make him an eagle, like you said, a hard drinking, smoking, coke snorting eagle. It's really just a brilliant masterstroke. And man, this is such a bizarre, intense book. I mean, I don't know. Was this kind of sort of what you expected before you read this, or did this book kind of catch you off guard? Were you not sure what to expect? Because I know this was your first time looking at it.
Well, I had no idea what to expect from this. I you know, I know we talked about how the thing that sets the stage for you, that really that kind of was abrupt. I don't know that's the wrong word. That was that made me feel somewhat unsettled about this was the fact that the forward is so crazy. Like the guys like try to defend the style that Sienkiewicz and Moore
Yes.
are doing, and I'm reading that, and I'm kind of like, okay, what is what does it say? What is this? I can't figure out what he's trying to do, what he's trying to say, like at that point. So I don't really know what's going to happen. And then like all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I start reading it, and each page begins to unfold, and like the first couple of pages, like it's such an assault to the senses, because it's like, because comics don't do this now at all. Like there's no comic that does this now. I mean, you were saying, is there anybody else who could do something like this? Like perhaps J.H. Williams could do this based on some of the stuff he's done with Alan Moore, but it wouldn't be so bonkers, because some of the paneling in this is out of control, and I don't really know like how he created this in his head.
Yeah,
because there's that part in the interview where he was saying, I think it was Alan Moore saying, is that he wrote 100-page comic script, and Sienkiewicz like distilled it down to 30 pages.
Oh yeah, he did say that, and I wonder about that, because that's so interesting to think that Alan Moore himself may have thought this was going to be 100 pages, but based on the form factor in terms of the way it was published, I'm not even sure how that would have worked. But it's kind of fascinating if Sienkiewicz was the one who made the choice to break it down and compress it this much, because it is very compressed. It's a very, very sharply compressed story.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know what, but there's really no other way to tell this story. You know what I'm saying? Like there's too much going on that I mean, it is covering such a huge, the time frame, that it's covering.
Yeah.
It's from World War II until the mid 80s. And it's, it'd be one thing if they just talked about like one event, that like the thing with the overthrow of the Shah. Well, no, not the overthrow of the Shah, but the installment of the Shah in Iran when the guy named Mossadegh, the elected leader, got deposed and killed and stuff like that. If you just did that, like that's a story that could be told in 30 pages, and that's just like a few pages in this. He covers the Bay of Pigs. He covers the Kennedy assassination. It's so much of these things that from the 80s, from the mid 80s onwards, we started talking about in movies and TV. Like these guys are doing it probably first. Like I said, I don't think like JFK, I think was the first movie that really took people to task like this. So maybe Falcon and the Snowman from '84. But I think this JFK was the first one. And the movie that really did it big was the movie in like the early 2000s called The Good Shepherd. I don't know if you ever saw that.
Oh yeah, the De Niro film. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that was quite a time after JFK. And speaking of JFK the film and JFK the person here, I want to read a little bit from the page where the Eagle is talking about what happened with the assassination of JFK. And one of the devices that Alan Moore uses throughout here, just in terms of the Eagle's speaking voice, like he's this gnarled, grizzled, cynical, jaded CIA agent, but the Eagle is constantly speaking with what is obviously a heavy dose of irony from Alan Moore, where the Eagle is saying all these horrible things and just justifying them as obviously the correct things to do. And whenever the Eagle mentions somebody trying to do something good or stand up for the Constitution or whatever, the Eagle's very dismissive of that person. So here's the Eagle talking about Kennedy in the aftermath of the Bay of Pigs and Cuba and everything. The Eagle says, pity about Cuba, though. Ask me, bad leadership's to blame. The company needs a sympathetic president that it can work with. Presidents back then, John F. Kennedy started out supporting us, then welched on the deal. I mean, in 61, when Cuba needed invading during the Bay of Pigs, he just kind of wimped out. Same thing in the Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962. The Miami Cubans, the mafia, they hated Kennedy for that. Plus, a lot of business people hated him because he looked like backing down on protecting their interests in Southeast Asia. I can't blame him. Guy was actually squishy soft on communism. Probably just as well his career got cut short when it did. Funny thing, after JFK died in Dallas, a lot of crackpots started claiming company involvement. They said a background bum in assassination photographs was Howard Hunt disguised. They said Jack Ruby, who shot Kennedy's assassin before he could stand trial, had mafia connections. So he had mob connections. These days, who don't? People even said Richard Nixon, after losing 1960's election to Kennedy, was working as Pepsi-Cola's attorney in Dallas the day Kennedy died. Bullshit. Why, Dick, he flew out of Dallas hours before Kennedy got hit to Idlewild Airport. It's called Kennedy Airport now. Anyway, Nixon worked for Pepsi, goddammit. Ain't no better symbol of the American way than Pepsi. And then it goes on from there. But that gives you an idea. That's one page of the Eagle detailing sort of the crimes and misadventures of the CIA. But, all this stuff is just, it's really crazy. And that's a nutty fact that I was not aware of. If Richard Nixon was in Dallas the day that Kennedy was assassinated and flew out mere hours before. I'd never heard that before. Have you?
I hadn't heard that before either. I mean, and again, it's like I said, there's a lot of details in this that are like, what? Is this for real?
Right. Yeah. Totally. Yes.
I mean, because there's look, the whole thing with the mob involvement, Sam Giancana trying to kill Kennedy, we've heard that for a long time. But the Nixon being there and him working for Pepsi being the place that that they're running, they're doing the heroin and opium come out, the plants in Southeast Asia a lot. It's just like, whoa,
right.
What there's a level of there's a level. Like they always talk, like we had this discussion one time in the magic room about like, it's hard to believe in conspiracy theories because it's the way they're done in movies and film. It's sort of like, oh, it's really cool, and all these people have to keep their mouths shut, everything like that. But in reality, people can't keep their mouths shut like that, and a lot of people are dumb, and you're relying on too many dumb people to do things that are siloed. But you look at what's going on in this book and what he's saying, and it's like there's a couple people who are like the guy named Kleins or something like that, or
right.
There's a few people who are like involved for like a couple of decades, just causing havoc all across the globe, and I feel like that makes more sense. It
does. It totally does. And it's like the definition of what people today would call the deep state, and the idea of these like perpetual government employees at a very high level that never go anywhere, and they don't have to answer to anyone, not even the passing presidents who they know will be gone in a few years. This book had to be mind-blowing, particularly coming before the internet and before so much information like this was widely accessible. Like this comic had to land like a fucking idea bomb, like a fact bomb, a whistleblower bomb in people's laps. I can't even imagine reading this as an adult in 88, because I think I picked up this book when I was a kid, probably around 80, 88 or 89. And I picked it up because I just loved Sienkiewicz at the time, but I obviously didn't understand really anything that was going on in this comic at the time. But to be an adult in that era and read this sort of, as you say, this assault on the senses, but also like an assault on your whole belief in America and the sanctity of America's institutions, the CIA, et cetera, et cetera. The only thing I can compare it to personally for me is like being 15 years old. And one of my friend's buddies, maybe I was 16, one of my friend's buddies showed us the Noam Chomsky documentary, the famous one from the 70s, Manufacturing Consent. And I remember sitting there watching that with my friend's dad, who was a very liberal, very progressive attorney. And he wanted to kind of like blow our little high school minds. And he did very effectively by sitting us down and having us watch Manufacturing Consent. Just absolutely made us look at the media and our government and all these things we'd believed in a radically different way. You know, it was like a little documentary film equivalent of a psychedelic drug trip that kind of scrambles your brain and rearranges what you believe in reality. And I would imagine for anybody who believed that the CIA was an organization full of, heroes and do-gooders, the way the Eagle presents it here, I would imagine that Brought to Light had to have been an incredibly cold bucket of water splashing you in the face. And you either were going to believe it was a whole bunch of lies, a whole pack of lies, or you were going to stop and really consider this carefully, because I mean, they weren't just making this stuff up out of whole cloth. I mean, it's coming from the Christic Institute, which at the time was a very notable, like we said, a very reputable nonprofit involved in these very legitimate cases where they'd won huge settlements fighting on behalf of people who had been wronged by these giant corporations. So yeah, this would be hard to dismiss if you really looked at it. And yeah, I would be really curious to go back and look at some of the responses and the reviews at the time, because for a comic that was done by two of the biggest creators in comics of that era, it's actually amazing how little remembered Brought to Light is, and how little remarked upon it is, and just how, this book is effectively kind of disappeared from the comic book conversation in modern times. Like, I never hear people talk about this book, which is crazy for an Alan Moore, Bill Sienkiewicz collaboration from '88, because the only other time Alan Moore and Bill Sienkiewicz really collaborated, I think, substantively was on, of course, Big Numbers, the unfinished Big Numbers, where we only got, 2 or 3 issues of it. But somehow that unfinished collaboration between Moore and Sienkiewicz gets 10 times more attention. I think I hear people talk about that way more than I hear anyone talk about this like finished collaboration that was complete between Moore and Sienkiewicz. And I don't know, I find it just interesting. And I'm sure part of the reason is just, practically speaking, the logistics of it. Like I said, it's been out of print, I think, forever. And there haven't been new editions of it floating around. But, honestly, same with Big Numbers. But I think Big Numbers seems like it made more of an impact on the popular imagination of comic fans, where Brought to Light, for all the reasons we've been talking about, suppression, density of material, sort of like unpleasant, horrific subject matter, for whatever reasons you want to throw out there, I think that this work is not remembered or talked about the way it should be. So I am really happy that we're trying to shine a little light on it today, because it's a very, very serious piece of comic book journalism, investigation, and literally whistleblowing. And it's a comic that deserves to be remembered and talked about, because it's doing something super significant that you just don't see done in comics very much at all, particularly not from creators at this level.
No. With a couple of things is that you mentioned there might be an injunction on the publication of this, and don't. I feel
like
really
I read that somewhere. I'm going to look for that while you talk.
Yeah, but I feel like that makes sense as to why this book's so expensive. It's probably so expensive because it has never been reprinted. They probably just did like this one print run, and they never told you not to do this anymore. And then who knows what's up with the rights to it, and is it lost? But the thing is, you mentioned you watched that Noam Chomsky thing, and and also going back to what you were saying a few minutes ago, maybe about how the Pentagon was like, hey, like comic books are the best way to get information out to people. And all this is pre-internet time, but I'm thinking about, I might get the name of this wrong, but there was like a documentary in like 2003, 2004 called like Spare Change, that was about the 9/11 thing.
Oh,
And
it was a loose change.
Yeah, loose change, right? And loose change, if you think about the way people even do stuff now on the internet, on YouTube, they kind of communicate with sequential art. You know, which this the most hard-hitting stuff, you know, like, you know, there's that little thing where the people are drawing out stuff and it's moving around, and it's, you know, it's like if people want to do political stuff like that, there's like that animation program that shows someone drawing the art. It's like they still use cartoons. They still use comic book stuff to convey information to us now. And I remember that Loose Change did that. Like Loose Change, like the execution of it was sort of like a moving graphic novel, you know, because obviously, and some talking head work, but it's only, but that's what I remember. I haven't seen that thing in whatever, like 20 years, something like that. Almost 20 years.
We should also mention Loose Change is a incredibly controversial documentary about what a lot of people would argue are conspiracy theories, of course, relating to the September 11th attacks. I've never seen Loose Change, but that's my perception of it from my memory. So I just want to throw that out there. Where this is not an endorsement. This is not an endorsement of Loose Change. We're just talking about references in terms of storytelling. Blah blah blah.
Exactly. I'm not trying to say it's true or not. I'm just saying that they use a technique that reminded me of comics. You know, and a lot of stuff on the internet now delivers information to you like a comic. I also think that like you are more inclined to watch a video like longer and understand it if it's a character that's talking to you than an actual human talking here, like a pundit. You know, it's the same. You know, so it's kind of an interesting. So he is sort of pioneering what has now become commonplace by doing this, because you can imagine if someone was able to animate this eagle now. And just to get it voiced by someone like Gilbert Gottfried or somebody like that, you know, and he could go through all this stuff, and it would be like, oh my God, and people would be, it's be a huge conspiracy theory video. It would go viral so fast. Now, there's one thing I want to bring up to you. I want you to turn to page 19. Okay,
yes.
This is the only page I didn't understand. Okay.
So, I think I know what you're talking about. Is this the page with the claw where he like pulls his claw off or something?
Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't know what's going on this page.
Yeah, I marked that page also. I'm glad you brought it up. I was going to actually mention that page as well. It's a really weird page. So let's look at that again. Maybe we can help each other figure out what it was, because I read it twice and I was a little baffled by it. So the eagle, it's kind of like a medium shot on the eagle. He's looking right at the reader, and he says, "Tell ya, having guys work for me in a private capacity is the best damn gimmick I ever came up with. It's like my party piece. You want to see it? You want to see my party piece?" And he's saying the word piece like a piece of, you know, a piece of fruit, Piece, or like a gun, I suppose. Yeah, okay. You want to see it? You want to see my party piece? You watch this. And then he takes one of his eagle talons and he uses the other talon to like rip off, to rip the talon, the one talon from the wrist. He just kind of like pulls it off, and there's like blood gushing from it, and he rips it off and he says, there you go. Now this is the best part. You watch this. I set it down on a bar like so. And he puts his severed talon on the bar, and he says, "Ha ha ha! Look at that! Ain't it great? Look at that little bastard go! Ha ha ha! Go on, boy! Commies! Sick 'em, boy! Sick 'em!" And then his talon is just kind of there with blood dripping from it. And then he says, "And you know, the best of it is if it gets caught in somebody's pocket or around somebody's throat, I can't be held responsible. Ain't it a peach? Shit, look at the little Dickens wriggle." And like his severed talon, I guess, is sort of wriggling on the bar. And then he says, okay, boy, that's enough for now. Time to go. Back up my sleeve till later. That's it. Good boy. There. And then he takes it and he reattaches the severed talon to his bloody wrist. Okay, so reading it now again for a third time, I guess I'm thinking it's like, all right, clearly he's saying that we've got these foreign actors that we're doing stuff with, but we're completely disavowing any connection to them, and so we're effectively severing them from our person. I guess like the CIA is severing themselves from whoever they're arming, whoever they're funneling money or drugs to or whatever. There's a layer of separation there where we're going to disavow them and pretend like they're never connected to us if they get caught. But in the meantime, it's like, go, sick 'em, go get the commies, do your thing. That's kind of what I'm taking from it now, is that like that's the metaphor, that it's the CIA is basically breaking off pieces of itself to then sick on foreign countries. But if anyone learns about it, we're going to pretend like that was never part of us in the first place. That's my take on it.
See, that's interesting. And just to be clear to the readers, like when he puts the talent down on the bar, it kind of moves sort of like Thing from the Addams Family is what it is. So it's got like a mind of its own. It's doing its own thing. See, to me, this is why what you're saying is interesting, because I read it slightly differently because of that one panel where it's like, hey, if this is caught in someone's pocket or around somebody's throat, I can't be held responsible. And I kept thinking to myself, in economics, the guy Adam Smith, they always talk about the theory of the invisible hand. And it's the thing in capitalism that causes things to happen, to push things in a certain way so capitalist markets, like kind of work. And it's always there, like pushing things so that the markets are efficient. And I'm also wondering in myself, sure, what you're saying is right. Like, we've taken and we have these fake government company fronts and stuff like that. But is he also saying that what we're doing is all in the name of capitalism? Because our fucking enemies are the Reds, are the communists? Like, that's the part that I didn't. It's like, I mean, and I'm not saying that either one is right or wrong, or there's multiple ways to read it. But I thought this was such a bizarre page, because he's not talking about, he's hiding something on this page. On the other pages, he's not hiding anything. He's naming names, he's naming events, he's naming people who got killed. He's showing like some newspaper photographs of people. But this page was very different and unique to me. And I just was like, these guys were doing too much with this book on this page.
Yeah, really. No, they both were. And that's why it feels like it really does seem like, in my mind, this is peak Alan Moore and it's peak Bill Sienkiewicz, where they're both just swinging for the fences with everything they do at this time. Because, Moore is coming off of Watchmen and V for Vendetta. He's coming off of Swamp Thing. And like you said, Sienkiewicz is coming off of Elektra, Assassin, and New Mutants, but also Stray Toasters simultaneously, or maybe right before this. I mean, these guys are, they're reinventing comics and just honestly trying to do things on just such a like impossibly difficult and original level every time up to bat. They're this is just an amazing document to see two guys at this point in their careers collaborating on something this challenging, formally as well as subject matter wise. This is just a really crazy thing. So looking at the rest of it, I mean, I think that I'm trying to look at my notes here. There was a lot of stuff about Castro and Cuba and Che Guevara. There's the JFK stuff, the Nixon stuff. There's a crazy quote from Henry Kissinger in here somewhere. There's a lot of talk of Jimmy Carter, and the Eagle hates Jimmy Carter because Jimmy Carter is like trying to follow the law and do good things in some ways, and the Eagle hates that. And it's just, you see the constant parade of U.S. presidents and the way that the Eagle and the CIA, by extension, feel about these different presidents from the Eagle's perspective. Here, I'm trying to find the part where Jimmy Carter comes into power.
Okay, but here's the thing I find interesting, right?
Yeah,
you mentioned a thing about Henry Kissinger, right?
Yes.
So he says this is the Kissinger quote. He says, "I don't see why we need to stand by and watch a country go communist because of the irresponsibility of its own people." And I find
that's mind blowing.
And I find that fascinating because of the climate that we're in right now, right? Because we could argue that we elected the previous president, and it's viewed as being irresponsible by the outside world. And I just feel like, oh yeah, these guys have a point of view, particularly Kissinger and everything like that. That's like, you can't make these decisions. We can't. It reminds me of sort of how like Alexander Hamilton thought that the public was not smart enough to vote. You know, see, it's kind of like he was like, the public just rabble. We can't let them have this. We can't let them have like direct democracy and stuff like that. And I feel like it's interesting that he's saying the same thing about these other countries because they're talking about taking down like the guy in Cuba, not Cuba, in Chile.
Allende. Yeah. I mean, this is a really revealing section of the book talking about Kissinger and Kissinger, who of course is widely considered one of the more despicable figures for a long list of reasons to have existed on the American political stage. And our narrator, the Eagle, of course, doubles down on Kissinger's quote, and the Eagle says, "My feelings exactly."
Yeah,
and of course, the Eagle agrees completely with his pal Henry here. This Eagle, man, he's one hell of a narrator, and it's really it's a feat of storytelling by Moore to kind of get you through all this information, and also from Sienkiewicz to sort of apparently compress it down into this package the way he's done. That's so tightly written and so much information on every page. I feel like this is a book that we could read 2 or 3 times and still keep finding new stuff in. There's another section that's kind of illuminating to me on page 16, where it's a 9-panel grid where the Eagle actually pulls out a gun. And he's loading the gun. He's loading the gun while he's talking. And I won't read all of his word balloons here, but what he says toward the end is quite interesting. He's talking about the situation going on with various foreign countries, and then he says how this one guy who is involved with some of this drug running and overseas illicit money rackets and all these various things that the CIA was doing. The Eagle says, in 1980, Francis Nugent killed himself. Bank collapsed amidst investigations and shredded documents. Kleins helped Houghton reach the Philippines safe. And then he goes on to say, I still can't understand Nugent's suicide. I mean, after helping run our guns and heroin, the guy had so much to be proud of. Why would he want to kill himself? Some nights I think about that. And as he says that, the Eagle holds the gun he's been loading to his own head, and you see the sound effect says click as the Eagle pulls the trigger. And then there's a silent panel for a couple panels, and the Eagle then looks down in the second panel at the gun. And then he tucks the gun back in his jacket. And he goes back to what he was saying about the guy killing himself. And he says, I can't understand it. And so the interplay there is amazing between the visual and what he's saying, because the Eagle obviously is saying he doesn't understand why the guy he had so much to be proud of and so much to live for. Why would he do such a thing? But in the meantime, the Eagle's looking very sad. and he's holding a gun to his own head and he's trying to blow his own brains out. That's just an amazing juxtaposition of the visuals and the verbiage. That's just that's extraordinary.
Well, you're absolutely right. But the thing is, though, well, just some context. This guy Hand and Nugan, they were these guys who set up a bank in Australia to launder all the money coming out of Pepsi's kind of like drug farm in Laos and shit. And obviously, this guy couldn't take it. But the cool thing is, but you said he tries to kill himself. I mean, he pulled the trigger. You know, and you see in like the second panel of the second and third panel of the whole page, he's got a bullet and he puts a bullet in the gun. So it's kind of like, and I think is it panel 6? I mean, panel 5 where he like where he rolls the barrel like it's Russian roulette. Is right? That was cool. So he like, but the last panel, the panel 8 when he's looking down at the gun after he's pulled the trigger and it said click. He's almost mad. He's like, "What? The bullet didn't go off?" Like this, the look on his face, like, "Oh my!" It's bizarre. It's so bizarre. Because in his next line is, "I can't understand it," but motherfucker, you just did it. You just pulled the trigger.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. It's great comic booking. It's just such great storytelling, and like it's like what we always say, Chris, just in terms of like using voiceovers in screenplays. Like when you're writing a movie, some people discourage the use of a voiceover, but in reality, of course, there's nothing wrong with using a voiceover. It's just that you don't want the voiceover to repeat the same information that you're already seeing visually. So if you're gonna have a voiceover in a movie, like the smart thing to do, the more artful thing to do typically is to have the voiceover actually give you different information, or perhaps even the opposite information from what you're seeing visually. And so you get that tension, you get that juxtaposition as a storyteller where you kind of have that space in between the two realities where the story suddenly becomes more participatory and more kind of alive in the mind of an audience, because now you're looking at these two things, there's a tension between them, and you're kind of left to figure out where the truth is. And it's a vastly more interesting way to tell a story, and you're not being so literal. And really, I think this is a great use of that kind of a device where the captions here function as something of a voiceover, and then we've got the visuals here, and they're arguing with each other, and it leaves it to us, the reader, to kind of figure out exactly what's going on with the eagle here. Does the eagle not believe what he's saying? Is the eagle conflicted? Is the eagle selling us a story but actually feeling some pangs of guilt himself, even though he would never admit it out loud to us verbally? That's what you could take from his actions here, but God knows, like, the eagle certainly doesn't talk like he's guilty. So there's a lot going on here. I think it's highly engaging, and it just points to the brilliance of Moore and Sienkiewicz and the gutsiness of their choices from front to back with how they tell this story. Just putting like an American eagle in like this bald eagle in a checkered fuchsia suit with like shoulder pads that looks like something that fucking David Byrne would have worn in a Talking Heads video circa this time, and instead having this eagle be the embodiment of American corruption abroad and the CIA, and having this eagle just being this total like debaucherous, a immoral character. It's an amazing decision. And like, you could have had 1,000 different creators who you gave that treasure trove of documents to. You could have had 1,000 different creators look at it, and not a single one of them would have made this decision to have this character tell the story. Like, it's such a wild decision. And man, I'm so glad Moore and Sienkiewicz were the ones who decided to do this, because this is just like utterly singular.
Well, the two things you forgot is that, yes, he has this fuchsia jacket on, but he's got a black shirt on, and he's got an aquamarine tie, and it's like this hard kind of like shock value of what he's wearing And his eyes are all bloodshot, and like
Yes.
the feathers around his eyes where his eyebrows would be are all kind of like weathered from like aging. It's such a cool design.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. It's all pretty.
It's amazing.
All pretty wild. I mean, you're right. I mean, like I'm so curious to know, like, what people thought at the time. Like, what was the critical response at the time? I mean, we looked at that one article where this guy was looking at it and he was saying, yeah, this is not. It doesn't quite serve up a masterpiece, but I'm kind of like, I don't know what level, like, your criteria. You can't use the criteria that you would use for another comic book for this. In
you
terms of
can't.
how to critique it. You just have to kind of look at it as like he's explaining a piece of, hidden American history that the government has perpetrated. And the thing is, it's crazy. It's like, this is stuff that they didn't perpetrate on Americans. They perpetrated it on the rest of the globe.
Right.
Which again kind of leads up to, all the stuff that Bin Laden was talking about. And all these people were talking about America like reap what it sowed. And it's, and that's that line, that chicken come home to roost thing that Malcolm X said that people thought, when he came back from Mecca. And it's just like, and I think like he knew what was going on because of who he was, Malcolm X, and then being overseas and talking with other Muslims. But Americans at the time, in the 63, 64, or maybe a little earlier, they didn't know. They didn't know the kind of stuff that America was involved in. But if you look at this timeline on this, well, at that time when Malcolm X is talking, they've already overthrown the guy who's in Iran. They do all this stuff in Laos. They're doing all this stuff in Central America. They're the stuff with Kennedy and all. There's so much stuff that was going on that I think people who like, and obviously an activist like Malcolm X was being like exposed to the wrong side of the law himself. He's not out of his mind saying, America is overstepping, and because he's probably seen it and maybe heard some of these stories, and now this book like is exposing the stories like more and more and more, just ones you didn't know about. Like, what's the one about like there was something in Cuba where Britain was trying to send some buses to Cuba, and the United States,
oh yeah,
like the shipping, the shipping container got sank. I mean, it's like that's a weird little detail, but it's like, did that happen? Did the U.S. like now? Here's the thing too that I've always talked about. I've always found this very fascinating. We fight the war in Vietnam about the communists, right? Like, we fight that war and we lose that war. But now we're really good friends with the communist government in Vietnam. We have been for the last like 20, 30 years. But why is Cuba different?
Right.
Like Cuba, the situation in Cuba is different for a reason. I think it's because, they say in this part, like Che and all the people like were involved in overthrowing that government, like in a different way, and turning their back on the money and turning their back on the mafia. And I feel like there's just a level of like, there's personal animosity that the government has toward Cuba that don't have just toward like, Vietnam or whatever it is, It's something that this book kind of like hints at, like there's personal vendetta as long as there's money involved too, and trying to fight off the communists.
Yeah. No, that is fascinating. And the whole story of Cuba is obviously so deep and multi-layered. There's a lot to say there. The first year I ever went to Sundance, I remember I saw this documentary that Oliver Stone made that I think was not released until way later, but at the time it was called Comandante. It was a story of Fidel Castro where Oliver Stone had kind of unprecedented access to interview Castro at length in Cuba. And Oliver Stone was there at Sundance talking about it, and I remember it was quite the thought-provoking documentary, even though I know a lot of people would disagree and did disagree with a lot of the conclusions that Oliver Stone was reaching in his documentary. But it was unmistakable that there were certain things about Cuba that were not necessarily convenient for people in the US to be well aware of, in terms of like, oh, their healthcare system functioned at a really high level for the public and was a public healthcare system. And there were all kinds of things that, on paper about Cuba, you would imagine just would not be information that the U.S. government would want to be widely available, perhaps. So I don't know. I think there's a lot about all these stories that we could get into where, there's reasons on top of reasons and there's nuances everywhere. At the end of the story, the eagle himself starts talking about the Christic Institute, and that's kind of where things get really meta. And the eagle starts talking about how, like, stuff started happening, and this Christic Institute, this pissant legal operation has been hassling us. Pretty soon we got problems all over, congressional investigations, criminal indictments, all kind of headaches. And he says, what is it with these guys? And so it's kind of meta, like getting very metatextual, where the eagle now is talking literally about the nonprofit group that has put together the research that has provoked this comic to be made in the first place. And then, more kind of artfully weaves that full circle back to talking directly to us, the reader, who, as you said, Chris, at the beginning, the readers who has been invited into the bar to sit with the eagle here. And the eagle says, so at the end, so this is where you came in, right? Yeah, it's business as usual. Always has been, always will be. And you wait till the elections and then tell you ain't seen nothing yet. Congress can't stop me. Christic can't stop me neither. You think they can? You think I'm worried about one little crummy asswipe legal outfit? Is that what you think? Because if that's what you think, buddy, then in my book, that makes you a goddamn communist. Capiche? Those shitheels can't touch me. I'm safe, okay? I'm totally safe. I mean, who's going to believe a ridiculous yarn like they're telling? It's like that whole story I just told you. Forget it. It didn't happen. It was a joke, okay? As for what really happened, well, earlier you asked what I was selling, right? Okay, it's like this. He's talking about the CIA here. We never assassinated anybody. We never smuggled drugs. We never laundered money or conspired with criminals and dictators. What really happened, America protected the world. The CIA protected America. Shackley, Klein's, and arrest protected the CIA, and that's why they're goddamn heroes. That's it. That's what I'm selling. You buy that, don't you? Come on, I got the goods right here. Why don't you take a closer look at what you're getting? And he holds up a suitcase, a little briefcase. And he opens the briefcase. He says, take a closer look what you're getting while I tell you what kind of price we're looking at. And then he says, we ain't after your money. You're a taxpayer. We already got your money. We don't even want you to do anything. In fact, just the opposite. Come on, take a look. All we're asking is your indifference. Just turn away. Pretend it ain't happening. Ain't like you got to give up part of yourself. No important part anyway. Come on. Look closer. Listen, can we do business? Listen, I ain't got all day. Are you buying or... Hey, what's the matter? Where you going? Oh, come on. Look, you didn't even finish your drink. Why don't you stick around? Hey, you and me, we're pals, aren't we? Sure, come on. We're birds of a feather. And that's it.
Right.
We the reader now, one would imagine, are recoiling with horror as we're now stepping out of the bar and we're running away from our eagle friend and this crazy story he's told us. And obviously, as with everything that the eagle says, we are to believe the exact opposite is true, and the exact opposite is what we should feel. And the eagle is telling us to be indifferent, and the parts that I'm skipping over here in the panels are the things that the eagle wants us to be indifferent to, which are these horrific killings that are happening overseas that I won't get into describing in detail here because it's probably not the kind of thing that YouTube would appreciate. But we get the message very clearly that this is what the Eagle wants us to do. And Alan Moore, the author, and Bill Sienkiewicz, the co-author, are telling us to walk away, to go away from what the Eagle is saying. And we head back out into the mist, and we see the Statue of Liberty once again, a ship in the harbor, and the final line of the story is what we began with at the beginning, which is a caption that says, "This is not a dream." And
Well,
it's pretty powerful. It's pretty damn powerful, I got to say.
well, there's a couple of things. It's all these last few pages are startling. But what I think is interesting is that the Eagle, when he opens the briefcase, it's just blood coming out of it, right? It's just blood spilling out.
Yeah, you're right.
And the point of view, like a first person shooter game of the reader, is him putting his hands up, backing away, putting his hands up like, stop, stay away, don't come any closer, don't come any closer. And it's just like in panel after panel when he's leaving the bar, he's outside, he's out on the docks. What I think is really startling is, yes, the last page is the Statue of Liberty, and you're there, and his hand is there, right, pushing back even still. And then the bottom of the frame, there's a little boat, and then what's in the really bottom corner is one of the swimming pools.
Yeah, it's a pool of blood. That's actually the very last image. You're right, Chris. That's the very last image that we're expected to see. It's the bottom right corner. So for a comic book reader, that's the very last part of the page you hit. Bottom right corner, and bam, you're out with a swimming pool of blood to think about.
Correct. Yeah, it's crazy.
That's so powerful, man. Yeah, you could literally break apart every page of this comic and spend a half hour talking about every page. Like, there is so much thought, so much intentionality. There's so much going on here. It really does deserve a lot more time than we even have to give it today. I think it's a startling piece of work. I think you're right. It's astonishing. It's really, it's got so much on its mind. It's such a brave, courageous piece of work. And it was obviously really personal for Moore and Sienkiewicz. I know both of their politics obviously agreed very much with the stance that the Christic Institute was taking in terms of government transparency. And I think Bill Sienkiewicz mentioned in that interview that we were watching with him talking about this book that his own personal politics he would describe as being closer to communist than anything else, and that he was someone who has always believed in universal health care and various things of that nature. So the fact that this book takes the stance that it does, toward communism and with the CIA's approach toward that worldwide, obviously it's all really personal for Sienkiewicz and for Moore. And, like so many of the creators that we've loved on this show, like Tim Truman and others that we've talked about, their politics and their beliefs about the world are really inextricable from some of the best work that they did. And I think that's something to be celebrated, whether you agree with their politics or not. I think it's a courageous stance for these very huge creators to take at the peak of their careers, to put out work like this that was obviously meaningful for them and was not about a paycheck in any way, shape, or form, because they could have both gone and done a fucking superhero miniseries and probably got paid 10 times more money. But instead, they wanted to do this with their cachet in the industry. And, God bless them. God bless Bill Sienkiewicz and Alan Moore. It's really, really amazing work. And we're so fortunate in the comic business to have had creators like this, who were some of the most powerful creators of the 80s, because I think it's because of their guts and their fortitude and their belief in their work, like that we got to have amazing pieces of work like this. And, it's like, I got so much respect for these guys more and more, just looking back at the choices they made. And this was a hell of a bold choice. So, I don't know what else to say about the book, but just kudos to everyone involved. I think it's an incredibly significant piece of work. And I hope, if nothing else, that this video that we're doing today is going to make a few more people seek this out and read this work and think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to try to repeat the things you said, but I do agree with what you're saying about the politics of artists. I mean, I've heard this people say all the time that all art is political. And I feel like there's a lot of times when you're younger and you're working your way up to the field, you got to suppress that, and it's not you hiding your voice, but you're suppressing like a element of you that wants to like express itself that's in your art. And then sometimes you never reach the point where you can take that gamble. And these guys, I think, took that gamble like at this time because, I don't know what happened. Like, Sienkiewicz's career in the 90s was not nearly as vibrant as it was in the 80s. And you don't know if it was a question of, you don't know if especially in the wake of like the Weinstein stuff where, did he get blacklisted on some level? Is there some level of work that he's not able to do because people are like somewhat like afraid of him? But he's saying that he's like, that scale of like 1 to 10, like 1 being like a conservative, 10 being a liberal, and he's like, I'm an 11. It's like he's letting that he's very much in a space where he's probably not going to suffer any bullshit anymore. Probably doesn't have to, So it's an interesting place to be and to produce a piece of work like this. I just think the tragedy is, the publication history was, not ideal.
Definitely.
And as we said, like, it was supposed to come out. There was supposed to be a version of this same information, same kind of story put out by Warner Books, and they bitched out. And it's clear why they did.
Oh yeah. It's crystal clear.
Clear. But again, like you said, it's like way more props to everyone at Eclipse and Cat Yronwode and all these people.
Yeah.
Because it's like you didn't have to do this, and I'm sure that you knew that when Eclipse came out. When Waters was like, "We're not going to do this. Here's some money for your trouble," you could have taken a hint. You didn't take a hint.
Mm-hmm.
You were like you were like the guy Pelt with the Pentagon Papers and all these people who did stuff, and like who whistleblowers. It just you're being like a whistleblower to a degree,
totally. And this is pre-Julian Assange, pre-Edward Snowden, and this is a different era. But I think, make no mistake, these were all creators and publishers taking significant risks. This is a comic that the U.S. government clearly would not have wanted to be produced, and they did it anyways. And man, this reminds me, we really ought to try to see if we can get Cat Yronwode to come on the show and do an interview with us sometime, because I know, she was a central figure as the co-founder of Eclipse Comics. In so many of the comics that we've covered on our show already. She was the editor of Aztec Ace. She was the editor and publisher, co-publisher of Aztec Ace, co-publisher, editor of this. I'm sure we'll probably cover Miracle Man, the other Alan Moore comic at some point, which Cat Yronwode also edited and published. So, such significant comics. We should really talk to her.
That wasn't like Saber. Saber, right, Saber.
Saber we should just we really are kind of the Eclipse Comics podcast half the time here. So yeah, it would be lovely to talk to her, because they are one of my favorite publishers for sure from the 80s, and it really is because they publish so much friggin' bold work. Work that you can imagine a lot of other people would not have touched with a 10-foot pole. So yeah, really impressive work. Another home run for Eclipse Comics, and obviously another home run for Sienkiewicz and Alan Moore. And like you said earlier, Sienkiewicz's lettering on this is a thing of beauty. His lettering is amazing, and it just once again drives home for me just what a poorer state comics are in today with the advent of font lettering. Because if you imagine Brought to Light being lettered by a font, there is just no way it would have a fraction of the power that you see on these pages right now, which are done by the human hand, and you can feel the emotion in not just every picture, but in every word. Every bit of calligraphy on the page is just it's dripping with emotion, quite literally dripping in some cases. And there is just no way, shape, or form that a font would convey any of that. And it's just one more reason why comics lettered by fonts are a huge mistake. And I'll be saying that every day for the rest of my life. And Bill Sienkiewicz here makes my case beautifully for me. I don't have to say a word. Just look at these pages. Look at this lettering. It's jaw-dropping. It's amazing.
So, everyone, if you can find this book on eBay, then you might actually go and purchase it. And I'd love to find out about the rights to this book, like what happened to the Sienkiewicz's art and all this kind of stuff. But that would be for another show. And now we gonna wrap up this week's episode. Thank you for listening. And
thank you, everybody. And if you're listening or watching on YouTube, folks, thank you very much for the support. And please, if you enjoyed the show today, please do remember to like and subscribe. If you are so moved, we really appreciate the subscriptions. We appreciate the likes. And if you got a comment to make, good, bad, or ugly, please chime in the comments section. It's the closest thing that we've got to a letters page. And we appreciate every single one of your comments. We read them all. Thanks, folks.
And see you soon.